had one similar to yours. As a kid, we lived very near an active set of train tracks, being constantly warned away from them by our parents. It's no surprise we kids grew up with a healthy fear and frequent nightmares of getting caught on the tracks. I was about 12 years old, dreamt I had stumbled on the tracks, and of course a huge freight train was bearing down on me. In the dream, my friend scampered to safety, but I was inexplicably bogged down and moving in slow motion, clawing at the dirt and gravel to try to get over the rail. In my last-ditch effort to reach safety, I dove for it. I literally flew out of my bed, halfway across the room, and cracked my head on the corner of my dresser. My mom patched me up and drove me to the hospital. Ended up with a few stitches and a big bowl of ice cream that night. When I was about 16, I was telling some story to my sister's boyfriend. I was rather animated about it and began to flail my arms about until I hit the glass fixtures of our ceiling fan and showered glass upon myself. Part of the glass cut around my nose and I began to rain blood. Was left with a nice scar and a decent story about situational awareness while speaking. Happened 6 years and 3 days ago. Was home alone early afternoon. Believed I was home alone. But then I heard a noise that I thought was inside the house. No one else should be home but me, so I was spooked. I crept out and listened for movement and thought I heard a voice downstairs. I tried to sneak down the stairs, but only made it to the first step. By the second step my heel slipped out from under me and I planted hard on the step and slid down to the last 3 steps, finally able to stop. My shoulder was sore trying to save myself on the rail. My back is beat to hell from hitting all the steps down. My tailbone is pulsing nothing but pain. Trying to get up made it worse. Nothing felt broken. I was able to get up after a minute or so and baby step around the corner where I found the source. It was my neighbors talking in their backyard and brother had his window open allowing it to carry into the house. For 5 years, if I sat longer than an hour my tailbone/coccyx hurt. Watching movies, which I love, was always troublesome. I got seat cushions for it that I couldn't go without at home. About 7 months ago it just stopped. No more pain. At work, when I moved to my new workplace, I was forced to switch from regular steel toes to heavy duty boots with a plate over the laces for my protection. While unloading a load of steel, the plate, that is there for my protection, caught on the lip of a steel beam I was stepping over on the stockpile and dropped me from standing up with my head 6 feet up to ground level. Very luckily, there was a 10x6 steel beam to catch me on the edge to keep my head from hitting the concrete floor, and I only had to get 12 staples and take a week off work. Of note, the only reason I bought the fucking boots in the first place is that the GM noticed I didn't have them and told me if I didn't show up next shift with them, I'd be sent home. Screen door FD up my ankle. One day I was taking my dog outside to use the bathroom early one morning and Snoopy decided he had to go really bad and started flying down the stairs of the back porch. He was on a leash and I didn't want to hurt him and make him fall down the stairs, so I rushed out behind him. I was wearing a pair of wool socks and slippers, and as I awkwardly started following him, the bottom corner of the screen door clipped me on the heel. It hurt a bit, and I just limped around as he did his business. When I got back inside I decided to take my sock off because it was uncomfortably hurting and I see there is a good amount of blood that has seeped through the sock. I pull it off and see that I actually have a pretty big gash across the back of my ankle. A fucking screen door did that to me all because of shitty timing. Remember when your parents told you to tie your laces or you would hurt yourself? Well, they were right. I was that kid who ran with untied laces. I fell and instinctively put both my arms out. I landed on my right hand/arm and managed to snap my forearm and dislocate my wrist. As I had dislocated my wrist before, as I was accident prone. I attempted to pop it back in myself in panic. I can't describe the crunchy noise that my arm made or the pain I felt. I then had to walk to the nurse's office at my school and wait for my parents to pick me up. They didn't think it was serious. At the hospital the x-ray was a little extreme and I had to have surgery to correct my arm 14 years later, and my wrist still isn't the same and it still hurts in the cold. Life tip: tie your thing laces. took my dad's high-powered rifle with scope out hunting without his permission when I was 15. Never having used a scoped rifle before, and with no one there to correct me, I slid the rifle butt off my shoulder and tucked it under my armpit before aiming. At the same time, I placed the rear of the scope right up against my eye and pulled the trigger. The recoil from the gun firing punched the metal edge of the scope right through the skin on my forehead and into my skull just above the bridge of my nose, as clean as if it was a cookie cutter. Hurt like hell and bled like a motherfucker. Plus I missed. And that, my children, is how dad came to get that funny arc-shaped scar between his eyes that you've always wondered about but were afraid to ask. Was at work, very stressed and tired. There was a skateboard on the ground about 10 feet away from me. I didn't know how to skateboard beyond just being able to slowly roll around. We just kept it around to casually ride whenever we needed a break from our work. I saw the skateboard as I was pacing around and, without thinking, ran over to it and jumped on. As you would accept, it went flying out from under me and I slammed into the concrete floor. I just stayed there on the floor for a minute, baffled by what I had just attempted, while my hip bone throbbed from the impact. I have no idea where the impulse to do that came from, and my brain was too sluggish to stop myself before it happened. I'm so glad I didn't hurt myself more seriously, since I was the only one in the building. I was even more relieved nobody was there to see me do something so incredibly stupid. Anybody who has TMG knows you can aggravate it in the stupidest ways. When I was in high school I was eating an apple and my jaw completely froze as I was taking a bite. The apple was just hanging from my mouth suspended by my teeth. I looked like a horse with brain damage. I had to get my dad to extract the apple from my mouth. It hurt like a bitch for a long time. I couldn't chew or talk properly for months and my entire face was crooked because my jaw was stuck off to one side. It healed eventually, but later I set it off again by eating a cookie. I once set it off by yawning too wide. It sometimes goes off on its own for no reason. I wish I knew what it was like to have a working jaw. In high school I tried to give the guy standing in front of me a light kick to the ass, since we were joking around, and I don't know how, but I slipped backwards. Obviously I have reflexes, and tried to break my fall by breaking my arm in 3 places. Yay. Also I once stepped on my own finger while struggling to put on my shoes. Tried stomping my foot in with my hand still gripping the sole. I hate my brain. My friend and I were playing road hockey and the puck slid into the stormed rain. Determined not to lose that puck we lifted the cover and put it on the sidewalk. However, my friend put his side down first and let go. I panicked and went to drop it, but my left middle finger got crushed so naturally I ripped it out, tearing the tip off my finger. Blood everywhere. I casually walked to my front door and said to my mom we might have to go to the hospital. She almost had a heart attack. Still have a really gnarly scar and it's a little less sensitive than my other digits. TL. Doctor, I stood on a fire to place a can of beer in it. I was at a cottage with a group of friends for a bachelor party weekend. Needless to say alcohol had been consumed. We had a pretty large fire that had now died down and become a nice bed of coals. Someone got curious and asked what would happen if we put a sealed can of beer on the fire. So I grab a can and walk up to the fire. I saw the coals and my drunk ass mind had the audacity to think the trick for fire walking is that you gotta be quick. Your feet don't get burned if they aren't touching the coals long enough. I could do that. I proceed to take my flip-flops off, take a step into the fire pit, bend down, place the can of beer in the middle of the fire, and take a step out of the fire pit. My technique about being quick did not pan out at all, and I horribly underestimated how long it took to place something down. At this point, I had been standing on red hot coals for probably about 3 full seconds. I looked it up later. Turns out coals glow red when they are about 600 deg.C. I immediately put on my flip-flops and went straight for the lake to cool off my feet. I couldn't walk normally for about 2 weeks, and it took about 3 months to fully heal. And that's how I got the nickname Firefoot. This happened about 2 weeks ago. I work in a gas station, and there's a few novelty cigarette lighters for sale. One of them is shaped like a gun, but there's one that's shaped like a strange blowtorch. The opening where the flames come out is hidden and only opens when you press down on the button. There was a bit of downtime at my work, so I was looking this blowtorch lighter over since it was the first time I saw it. I couldn't tell where the opening was, and I didn't notice the little warning sticker that pretty much says this is where the flames will be, so I held it upside down, thinking it must be a bit like the gun lighter. I pressed the flicker with the lighter, aimed right at my fingers. Ended up with blisters on my 2 fingers for about a week for the trouble. Thankfully, it seems to have healed pretty nicely now. When I was 6, my family got our first minivan. It was the mid 1980s. I was sitting in the middle seat on the driver's side and I noticed that there was a cool compartment in the molding and armrest under the window. So I opened it and saw this odd button. I pushed it and it just sorta sank down and clicked. A minute or so later I heard another click and it popped back out. So I picked it up and the bottom side was glowing orange. I was very curious about this strange silver pin with a glowing orange base, and as I turned it in my fingers to examine it more closely I felt a horrible pain on my middle finger. I screamed and dropped it on the floor. I injured myself at age 6 on cigarette lighter. I'd never seen one before, especially in a rear seat. I used to work for a drywall supply company and was loading some 12-foot sheets. They come in bundles of 2 on the back of a customer's truck. Drywall generally comes from the factory in stacks of 40 or 50 bundles, depending on the thickness. The factory puts talc between the bundles to keep them from sticking to one another. Too much talc, and they slide dangerously, makes it hard to keep on the trucks while driving down the road, even when strapped securely. Too little talc, and well, they are difficult to slide. I'd brought a stack over on a forklift that had too little talc, so they were a bear to get over the back of dude's tailgate. I was on the driver's side pulling, the customer was on the passenger's side, and we were grunting it out when my hand slipped and I punched myself in the nose hard enough to knock myself down to the ground. It took a while before I lived that one down. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more daily 6 PM Reddit uploads.